In this presentation, you will learn about hermeneutics. The methodological perspective of hermeneutics relates to the interpretation of texts. It is one of the most complex research paradigms where even social scientists struggle regarding its application. In hermeneutics, texts are not just read and interpreted for what has been written, but also attempts to understand what it implies, by whom and why it was written, in what context was it written, amongst other questions. Hermeneutics has been largely understood as the reading of the theological scriptures or texts with principles of exegesis, which means with critical interpretation. Hermeneutics can also be seen as the moving away from the positivist tradition, as it emphasizes the subjective aspects of interpretation rather than the objective side of the positivist tradition. Hermeneutics can be seen as the science of interpretation, dealing predominantly with the ways and problems of interpreting these texts. Hermeneutics in philosophy emerged as theories of understanding with specific emphasis, such as methodological hermeneutics, epistemological hermeneutics, ontological hermeneutics, and so on. Religious texts thus became more accessible with the help of hermeneutics. It also helps understand what meanings these texts imply. Thus, hermeneutics has been seen as a science which helps in establishing the rules, principles, and methodologies for the interpretation of religion and its scriptures, and also its relation to society. The term hermeneutics was originated in ancient Greek, and its modern term first enters the academic lexicon in Latinate form in the work of the Protestant theologian Johann Conrad Danheur. The Latin term hermeneutica is a translation of the Greek hermenia, which was used not only to designate the activity of interpretation, but also the activities of declaration, explanation, translation, communication, and even artistic elocution. One can trace hermeneutics or the concept of hermenia to Aristotle. In his second major work on interpretation, known as De Interpretatio in Latin, Aristotle defines hermenia and can be broadly understood as communication, and more specifically, it is an expression, animal or human, that is meaningful, that intends to communicate, and that seeks to stimulate attention, acknowledge, or agreement. The next stage of development laid the foundation for modern hermeneutics. This was led by Friedrich Daniel Ernst Schleiermacher, a German Protestant theologian, Bible scholar, and philosopher, as he saw hermeneutics as a science for understanding itself. He moved from a concern with the analysis of texts from the past to the problem of how members of one culture or historical period grasp the experiences of members of another culture or historical period. Schleiermacher thus unified and universalized hermeneutics, blending it to become general hermeneutics. According to Gadamer, for Schleiermacher, the meaning of text is not at all what it seems to tell us directly, but rather its meaning should be recovered by a disciplined reconstruction of its original historical situation. Hermeneutics evidently plays a central role in Schleiermacher's philosophy as a whole, which he expressly separates in certain respects from his theology, as he also repeatedly insists that there should be no difference in the principles of interpretation for religious and for secular texts. Schleiermacher's ideas and approach have been carried forward, upon which we see the modern hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, the modern transition. We see a gradual change from its background in spiritual and other textual interpretation. Hermeneutics became the core discipline for understanding all great expressions of human life, and as such, this transition was instigated by William Dilthey, a German historian and hermeneutic philosopher. Dilthey was highly influenced by the work of German philosopher Schleiermacher and developed it further, while simultaneously rooting the study in the history of mankind. The history of views played an important role in Dilthey's understanding of hermeneutics. As Keene and Lorne observe, Dilthey attempted to develop hermeneutics as a methodology for the humanities that has objectivity, and as such, just as explanation is the method of natural sciences, understanding would be the method for humanities. Hence, hermeneutics moved from the positive tradition, as Dilthey brought in the idea of Verstehen along with hermeneutics into the philosophy of social sciences. Dilthey based his arguments on the idea that the social science must incorporate the method of understanding to grasp the subjective consciousness of the participants. Understanding is defined by Dilthey as the process in which we grasp something inner, something psychical, which is the experience of an author by way of an exterior sign given in sensibility. With this, Dilthey shifted the focus of the philosophy of social sciences from positivist tradition towards the more objective science with emphasis on the subjective aspects of it, understanding. Dilthey thus professed that a true science of humanities was possible only with the infusion of Verstehen into the philosophy. Another early writer methodologically relevant to hermeneutics is Edmund Husserl, another German philosopher who is highly regarded for his contribution to the school of phenomenology. In fact, Blakey states that the phenomenology can be regarded as a parallel intellectual tradition to hermeneutics. Husserl too strongly opposed the methods of natural sciences, as for him, humans are conscious of their activities and that it is this consciousness that plays an important role in understanding their social life. Husserlian phenomenology is built up around the idea of reduction that refers to suspending the personal prejudices and attempting to reach the core or essence through a state of pure consciousness. Blakey observes that, for Husserl, believed that it was possible for a human being to exist in a state of pure consciousness. Husserl also promoted bracketing one's thoughts and prejudices in order to interpret. Husserl's ideas were taken forward in a different direction by his famous disciple, Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, conceptualized another school of phenomenology termed as hermeneutic phenomenology. Heidegger strongly rejected the idea of suspending personal opinions and appealed for the interpretive narration. Heidegger also advocated that the focus of the philosophy should be on the subjective experience of the individuals, which remains the crux of the interpretative process. As stated by Sheehan, phenomenology in Heidegger is entirely about hermeneutical questions. Having a sense or meaning of something remained of utmost importance for Heidegger. Thus, the school of thought, hermeneutic phenomenology, was founded with Heidegger's works such as History of Concept of Time, Being and Time, and was later enriched by other scholars. However, Heidegger's approach was quite different from that of Husserl and Dilthey. Hermeneutics recent developments. There has been a growing interest in the study of hermeneutics recently. Hermeneutical interpretations remain particularly important for debatable topics in world religions. As observed by Keane and Lorne, that in the latest developments within the hermeneutic tradition, there is what might, in a very general sense, be called a new turn toward not only self understanding but also objectivity, different from natural sciences. Since it is the objective that hermeneutics has to reflect upon, it should be first of all a theory of things and of knowledge about objectivities before being a practical theory of self understanding, and hence new possibilities are opened up. Prior to classical hermeneutics, the religious text had limitations for its interpretation. With the advent of hermeneutics, the texts were interpreted to understand what these meant. With Aristotle's major contribution, hermeneutics moved to Schleiermacher's emphasis on understanding specific contextual, cultural, or historical experiences. Thereafter, hermeneutics was enriched with the infusions of various thoughts and ideas from philosophers such as Dilthey, Husserl, and Heidegger, moving on to the more recent ones. I hope you now have a better understanding of hermeneutics. Thank you for watching the presentation.